scene, I like to practice my slaps on an inanimate object.
Like what?
What?
Yeah, what was the inanimate object?
Yo.
Curly Howard was the embodiment of laughter. His antics, impeccable timing, and wild expressions made him a beloved icon of American comedy. Millions adored the Three Stooges, but behind the slapstick gags and joyful facade, a tragic story unfolded. Curly's life was far from the carefree image he projected on screen. Hidden health struggles, relentless pressure, and personal demons gradually eroded the vibrant personality fans celebrated. Now, we peel back the curtain on the heartbreaking reality behind the laughter. How did a man so full of life and humor endure such profound suffering? Stay with us as we uncover the tragedy of Curly Howard. Before Curly Howard became a household name, he was Jerome "Curly" Howard, a spirited young performer in the vaudeville circuit. Born in 1903 in Brooklyn, New York, Curly displayed an uncanny sense of timing and a natural flair for comedy from an early age. He joined his brothers in small theatrical productions, honing the physical comedy and improvisational skills that would later define his career. Audiences were drawn to his infectious energy, boundless enthusiasm, and seemingly effortless charm. Vaudeville was grueling work, demanding long hours and relentless touring schedules. Curly thrived in this environment, channeling exhaustion into exuberance and learning to captivate audiences with exaggerated expressions, acrobatic stunts, and inventive slapstick. Colleagues recall that even in the toughest moments, Curly's spirit remained unbreakable, his laughter often lifting the morale of the entire troupe. By the late 1920s, Hollywood's attention turned toward vaudeville performers, eager to translate stage success to the silver screen. Curly's unique physicality and comic sensibility made him an obvious choice for screen work. His early appearances in short films and minor studio productions showcased his talents, hinting at the iconic persona he would soon adopt. Yet behind the infectious smile and playful antics, Curly carried the weight of constant self-improvement and the pressure to succeed in an unforgiving industry. These formative years shaped not only his career, but his identity. The discipline, resilience, and charisma he developed on the vaudeville stage became the foundation for the legend that millions would come to adore. But even as stardom loomed, the seeds of physical strain and exhaustion were quietly taking root, foreshadowing the hardships that would later overshadow his brilliant comedic genius. By the early 1930s, Curly Howard had joined forces with his brothers Moe and Shemp, creating a comedy team that would soon become legendary. When Ted Healy introduced Curly to the lineup, the trio's chemistry was undeniable. Audiences were captivated by Curly's boundless energy, exaggerated expressions, and unpredictable antics. What began as a minor vaudeville act quickly transformed into a cultural phenomenon, with Curly's unique brand of slapstick making him the star of the group. The Three Stooges short films captivated audiences during the Great Depression, providing much-needed escapism. Curly's performances were magnetic. His high-pitched squeals, physical comedy, and impeccable timing elevated the act above mere gimmickry. Behind the laughter, however, the demands of constant production were grueling. Studios expected perfection, often requiring Curly and his brothers to perform dozens of takes in sweltering heat under punishing schedules. Yet he rarely complained, channeling exhaustion into the manic energy that defined his on-screen persona. Colleagues later recounted the transformation Curly underwent when the cameras rolled. Off-screen, he was playful but vulnerable. On-screen, he became a whirlwind of chaos, drawing audiences into a world where the absurd felt natural. This contrast only heightened his mystique and popularity. Despite the success, signs of strain were already appearing. The relentless pace, coupled with Curly's own perfectionism, began taking a toll on his health. Fatigue, stress, and minor injuries from physical gags were early warnings of the deeper struggles ahead. Nevertheless, the Stooges' rise cemented Curly's place in comedy history. He became the face of their act, the reason audiences flocked to theaters, and the symbol of slapstick excellence. While fans laughed uncontrollably, Few realized the personal cost behind every pratfall, every exaggerated fall, and every gleeful squeal. Curly's genius brought joy to millions, but it also masked the cracks beginning to form in his health and emotional resilience, a tragedy that would shadow his later years. Curly Howard's infectious laughter and wild antics concealed a man quietly battling the pressures of fame, physical exhaustion, and personal insecurities. While audiences saw boundless energy and carefree humor, behind the scenes, Curly faced challenges that few could have anticipated. Colleagues recall that his jovial persona often masked fatigue, frustration, and mounting stress, a combination that would later take a devastating toll. The demands of producing short films at Columbia Pictures were relentless. Days stretched into endless hours of rehearsals, multiple takes, and physically taxing stunts. Curly's routines were punishing. Pratfalls, slaps, and acrobatics performed repeatedly until perfect. While the laughter he generated seemed effortless, each performance required precision, endurance, and constant improvisation. Over time, the cumulative strain began to erode his stamina and affect his health. Beyond the physical toll, Curly also struggled with personal insecurities. He was acutely aware of his role as the comic centerpiece, feeling pressure to continuously outshine his brothers and deliver performances that thrilled audiences. Anxiety over disappointing fans or failing on set often led to sleepless nights, affecting both his performance and emotional well-being. Friends noted periods when his usual cheerfulness gave way to quiet withdrawal, a side of Curly rarely seen by the public. Additionally, Curly's off-screen life was complicated by the isolation fame imposed. While his humor brought joy to millions, the relentless schedule and public persona left little room for genuine personal connections or rest. Behind every high-energy squeal and exaggerated fall was a man grappling with exhaustion, self-doubt, and the unyielding expectations of Hollywood. These hidden struggles remained largely invisible to fans who only experienced the joy and laughter he provided. Yet they laid the groundwork for the tragic decline that would later overshadow his brilliance, proving that even the most vibrant entertainer can suffer profoundly behind the scenes. Even at the height of his fame, cracks in Curly Howard's health and performance began to show. Colleagues and directors noticed subtle changes, missed cues, slower reactions, and moments where his boundless energy faltered. What had once seemed effortless, his trademark high-pitched squeals, contorted expressions, and frenetic physical comedy, now demanded an increasing toll on his body and mind. For fans, Curly remained the unstoppable comedic force, but behind the camera, the first signs of decline were unmistakable. These early indicators were often dismissed as minor fatigue or the natural consequences of an intense work schedule. However, insiders began noticing patterns that worried them. Curly, who had always been able to sustain a whirlwind of antics for hours on end, started experiencing bouts of exhaustion mid-performance. Directors were forced to adjust shooting schedules, and his brothers Mo and Larry observed his difficulty maintaining stamina during physically demanding sequences. The pressures of fame compounded the issue. Columbia Pictures relied heavily on Curly as the comedic centerpiece, and any sign of weakness was alarming. Rather than rest, Curly pushed himself harder, fearing he would disappoint fans or lose his prominent place in the act. The combination of relentless work, physical strain, and personal stress began to affect his overall health, a reality largely invisible to audiences enchanted by his exuberance. Family and friends also observed troubling changes. Curly became increasingly irritable, sometimes lashing out during rehearsals or reacting unpredictably on set. These mood swings, coupled with physical fatigue, marked the beginning of a troubling trajectory. Though he continued to perform, the man who once seemed indestructible was showing vulnerabilities that hinted at the more serious health crises looming ahead. The first signs of decline were subtle, yet ominous, a warning that the unstoppable Curly Howard might not be able to outrun the physical and emotional tolls of Hollywood forever. By the mid-1940s, Curly Howard's relentless pace and physical comedy began exacting a serious toll on his health. What started as fatigue and minor mishaps escalated into full-blown medical crises that shocked both colleagues and fans. Despite his reputation as the unstoppable force of the Three Stooges, Curly was confronting vulnerabilities that few had anticipated, and the laughter he inspired masked the very real dangers to his well-being. Colleagues recall the first major incident, a severe stroke that left Curly temporarily incapacitated. The sudden event was alarming. He, who had seemed tireless and indestructible, was now confronting a medical emergency that threatened both his career and life. Doctors warned that the physical demands of his work, combined with underlying health issues, posed serious risks. For the Stooges, this was a wake-up call. The man whose comedy had carried them to fame was in real jeopardy. The impact on his career was immediate. Curly's performance energy began fluctuating, and directors had to accommodate slower takes and simplified routines. Fans, oblivious to the medical crises, continued to see the exuberant Curly on screen, unaware that behind the scenes, he was fighting to maintain even a fraction of his previous vigor. Even beyond the physical effects, the stroke and subsequent health complications had emotional consequences. Curly faced frustration and anxiety over his declining abilities, feeling a loss of identity tied to the very comedy that had defined his life. The combination of physical and emotional strain created a perfect storm, making it increasingly difficult for him to sustain the persona that audiences adored. These shocking health crises foreshadowed an inevitable decline. While Curly continued to appear in films, the man behind the laughter was slowly being consumed by illness. The tragedy was not just in the loss of energy, but in the cruel contrast between his on-screen vitality and the fragility of his real-life body, a heartbreak that only deepened with time. Curly Howard's fame, while bringing adoration and financial success, came with a relentless and unforgiving pressure. The public adored the Three Stooges for their manic energy and absurd antics, and studios demanded perfection. Curly was expected to deliver non-stop physical comedy, high-pitched squeals, and unpredictable improvisation, night after night, take after take. While audiences laughed uncontrollably, few understood the grueling toll this fame was taking on him. The relentless schedule left Curly exhausted. Columbia Pictures, like many studios at the time, prioritized productivity over health, pushing performers to work long hours without rest. Stunt-heavy routines, physically demanding gags, and constant improvisation left him drained both physically and mentally. Behind the slapstick was a man battling fatigue that often resulted in mistakes or delayed filming, which only intensified the pressure from directors and producers. Beyond the studio, the expectations of fame weighed heavily. Curly felt he had to maintain the persona audiences loved, even when he was sick, exhausted, or emotionally fragile. There was no room for weakness, no allowance for human vulnerability. Any hesitation could jeopardize his career and the livelihood of his colleagues, including his brothers Moe and Larry. The weight of responsibility was enormous, yet he bore it silently, hiding pain behind laughter and smiles. This combination of physical exhaustion, mental strain, and public scrutiny created a perfect storm. Friends and family noticed his declining health, but Curly refused to slow down, fearing the loss of his identity and purpose. The vibrant, unstoppable figure audiences saw on screen was increasingly a mask, hiding a man struggling to keep pace with both his fame and his deteriorating body. Curly's tragic reality highlights a cruel truth of Hollywood. The demands of fame can consume even the most talented, leaving behind exhaustion, illness, and heartbreak beneath the laughter that the world adores. As Curly Howard's health and performance began to falter, Hollywood turned a blind eye. Columbia Pictures and the entertainment industry were reluctant to confront the reality. Their star was deteriorating, Curly had become a cash cow, the face of slapstick comedy, and acknowledging his decline risked financial loss and public panic. Behind the scenes, colleagues worried, but the studio's priority was clear: keep the act alive, no matter the cost to the performer. Directors and producers often minimized Curly's struggles, chalking up fatigue and mistakes to temporary lapses or moodiness. Requests for lighter schedules or medical breaks were rarely accommodated. Instead, Curly was pressured to continue performing physically demanding routines, sometimes days after serious illnesses or injuries. His private suffering was concealed beneath exaggerated facial expressions and comedic pratfalls that entertained millions. The contrast between the vibrant on-screen Curly and the fragile man off-camera was stark and heartbreaking. Even fellow performers found it difficult to advocate for him openly. Moe and Larry quietly adjusted routines to protect him, but they too feared backlash. Speaking out against studio practices could jeopardize careers and reputations. As a result, Curly carried the weight of expectation largely alone, his health and dignity subordinated to the demands of Hollywood and audience appetite for laughter. Fans remained blissfully unaware, believing every squeal, fall, and zany gesture was effortless. The industry's reluctance to acknowledge Curly's decline underscores a harsh reality. Fame often masks suffering, and the pressure to maintain a public image can intensify personal tragedy. Curly's decline was not due to laziness or incompetence. It was a direct result of relentless work, physical strain, and a system that prioritized profit over human well-being. Behind the comedy that delighted millions, a man struggled quietly, enduring a decline that Hollywood refused to see. Decline did not occur in isolation. It reverberated through the lives of his family and colleagues, leaving emotional scars that would last long after his performances. For his brothers Moe and Larry, the man who once brought them laughter and camaraderie became a source of anxiety, guilt, and heartbreak. Watching Curly struggle with his health and the pressures of fame was a constant emotional strain. Moe, who often assumed the role of protector on and off screen, felt helpless. Despite adjusting routines and attempting to shield Curly from the most physically demanding stunts, the toll was undeniable. Larry, too, felt the weight of responsibility, balancing concern for Curly's well-being with the demands of performing for audiences that expected perfection. The trio faced the impossible task of maintaining their comedic reputation while silently confronting the reality that their star was fading. Family members also bore witness to Curly's suffering. Friends recall that he oscillated between moments of humor and sudden vulnerability, leaving those close to him unsure how to respond. His struggles were compounded by the public's perception. Curly was a symbol of joy, and those around him often hid their worry to protect his image and preserve his dignity. The emotional impact extended beyond worry. Anxiety, fear, and guilt intertwined with frustration and helplessness. Curly's colleagues sometimes felt resentment toward the studio, which refused to accommodate his declining health, intensifying the emotional burden on those trying to protect him. Off-camera, laughter became a mask, and smiles concealed a reality of concern, stress, and heartbreak. The tragedy of Curly Howard lies not only in his personal decline, but in the ripple effect it created. His suffering became a shared burden, a silent agony endured by family and colleagues who loved him, watched helplessly, and tried in vain to preserve the man behind the laughter. The final years of Curly Howard's life were a painful contrast to the vibrant energy that had made him a legend. By the late 1940s, repeated strokes and ongoing health complications had reduced his ability to perform, leaving him physically fragile and emotionally exhausted. The man who had once executed acrobatic gags with boundless enthusiasm was now struggling to complete even simple routines. Despite the decline, Curly remained fiercely dedicated to his craft. On set, he attempted to channel his old vitality into performances, but fatigue and injury increasingly interfered. Colleagues recount watching him collapse from exhaustion after scenes that previously would have required minimal effort. The humor that had once flowed naturally now demanded immense concentration, highlighting the cruel reality that his physical and mental stamina could no longer sustain the persona audiences adored. Away from cameras, Curly faced emotional turmoil, isolation, frustration, and a growing awareness of his limitations weighed heavily. He struggled to reconcile the joyful image that fans celebrated with the man he had become, a shell of the energetic performer he once was. Friends and family provided support, but even their care could not alleviate the profound sense of loss he experienced, both personally and professionally. Financial pressures, coupled with studio expectations, compounded the suffering. Columbia Pictures continued to rely on the Three Stooges formula, offering few accommodations for Curly's declining condition. The industry that had elevated him to stardom now seemed indifferent to his well-being, amplifying the tragedy of his final years. Ultimately, Curly Howard's last performances are tinged with a bittersweet poignancy. Audiences saw laughter and chaos, never realizing the pain behind the scenes. His final years remind us that the brightest stars often burn themselves out, leaving behind a legacy of joy shadowed by personal suffering. Curly Howard's legacy is a bittersweet testament to talent, perseverance, and the hidden costs of fame. He remains an icon of comedy, celebrated for his unparalleled energy, physical brilliance, and ability to bring joy to millions. Yet, behind every squeal, pratfall, and chaotic routine was a man enduring immense physical strain, emotional exhaustion, and the relentless pressures of an unforgiving Hollywood system. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the cost of sustaining perfection for public consumption. Colleagues and historians emphasize that Curly's decline was not due to lack of skill or dedication, but the immense burden of expectation. Studios prioritized box office success over performer well-being. Audiences demanded constant hilarity, and the pace of production left little room for recovery. Curly's health crises, strokes, and eventual inability to perform remind us that even the brightest entertainers are human, susceptible to the same vulnerabilities as anyone else. The impact of his tragedy resonates beyond the screen. Family, friends, and co-stars bore the emotional weight of his decline, navigating grief, guilt, and helplessness while maintaining appearances for fans and the media. Curly's story reveals the invisible costs of comedic genius, the hidden suffering behind laughter, the private battles concealed by public joy, and the personal sacrifices that shaped a career beloved by generations. Yet, despite the heartbreak, Curly Howard's influence endures. His comedic timing, physical inventiveness, and magnetic personality continue to inspire performers worldwide. Audiences still laugh uncontrollably at his antics, unaware of the personal toll behind each exaggerated expression. His life reminds us that the most joyful faces may conceal the deepest struggles, making his story both a celebration of brilliance and a poignant tragedy of Hollywood's harsh realities. Curly Howard's legacy is thus a mixture of laughter and sorrow, a stark reminder that fame can elevate, yet also consume, leaving behind both joy and heartbreak. Curly Howard's life was a brilliant comedy shadowed by tragedy. Behind the laughter and joy he brought to millions lay exhaustion, illness, and heartbreak. Remembering his story is a tribute to both his genius and the harsh realities of fame. Reflect, share, and subscribe to uncover more hidden truths behind legends.